I've never really felt the need to go and party. And certainly going to Jeffreys was not about partying. Absolutely.
Behind polished smiles and public bows, a former maid steps forward with a portrayal of Prince Andrew that no palace PR could conceal as her account pulls back the silk curtains to expose small cruelties, hidden routines, and a sense of entitlement that hardened into habit over decades.
Oh, in 2010, there certainly wasn't a party to celebrate his release in December.
Today we assemble the testimony and the subtle moments that uncover a wider truth about power and privilege, exposing private humiliations, hushed commands, and favors traded in exchange for silence.
Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations.
And we ask what unfolds when servants finally speak and the crown's polished image begins to fracture as we uncover the unfiltered truth about the valet who knew too much inside the royal estate long before the scandals and headlines, where a quieter story was developing behind closed doors, a story murmured among the people who served the royals daily, because while most outsiders imagine palace staff as loyal, refined professionals moving gracefully through marble corridors, the reality was far more complex, especially for those assigned to Prince Andrew, who felt the tension more sharply than anyone and carried private resentment they barely dared express, including a man named Paul, Andrew's longtime personal valet who lived in an apartment directly linked to the prince's rooms and spent years packing his clothes, arranging his belongings, and responding to his every demand while secretly hating his job not because of the hours but because of Andrew's behavior, made worse by the strange, almost unbelievable requests such as being awakened in the middle of the night to take Andrew's Jack Russell Terrier Bendix outside at 2 or 3 a.m., standing half asleep in the freezing dark smoking a cigarette to stay awake, nightly disruptions that left him exhausted and bitter. And on some nights, while security officers patrolled the grounds, they encountered Paul venting that he despised the prince, describing him as rude, demanding, and cruel in ways that shocked even those used to royal entitlement. At one point joking grimly that he hoped Andrew's upcoming ski trip would end with the prince sliding off a mountain, his resentment matched by many insiders who believed Andrew had been allowed to misbehave for too long and that if Prince Philip had stepped in earlier, perhaps even shoved a bar of soap in his mouth the first time he cursed at staff, things might have been different. But instead Andrew grew into adulthood without boundaries, shielded as the Queen's favorite in a world where hierarchy ruled everything, including the staff cafeteria divided into 3 sections from French menu service for senior officials to microwaves and kettles for maids and footmen, reinforcing silent understanding of status while long-serving workers treated the palace as their entire world and loyalty became a way of life, a loyalty that became dangerous because no matter how badly Andrew behaved, no one challenged him. Not the footman, not the valet, not even the protection officers whose job was to protect him, not question him, raising the darker question of what happened when no one was watching, because the deeper one goes into the royal household the clearer it becomes that power not only shapes behavior but shields it, and by adulthood Andrew's world was arranged so that every flaw, bad choice, or cruel remark slipped through the cracks, seen and whispered about but never confronted, creating an environment of silence that later raised troubling questions about his life outside the palace, with protection officers describing their work as duty without judgment because they were shadows who kept him safe, not accountable. And though they did not enter private rooms or question where he went, they noticed subtle clues, odd travel plans, strange companions, sudden shifts in routine, that only made sense years later. While inside the palace loyalty acted as a protective barrier where a maid might witness something suspicious and stay silent, a footman might overhear something disturbing and say nothing out of fear of losing the only life he knew, and senior officials prioritized loyalty over questioning, leaving Andrew protected by rank, heritage, and a mother who adored him, even as cracks showed in his childish, entitled behavior such as his infamous teddy bear arrangement ritual that made him seem trapped in emotional immaturity. And when someone with that mindset is given limitless indulgence, the outcome becomes unsettling, leading staff to quietly wonder who could ever stop him in a place where discipline was weak, criticism discouraged, and consequences non-existent. And although those who served him longest admitted he was the only royal who repeatedly caused problems, the palace's culture of silence eventually spilled into the outside world as Andrew formed relationships far beyond England, turning whispers into fear and private concerns into public scandals when he could no longer hide behind the loyalty that once protected him even from himself. And if that seems shocking, it only deepens when another staff member steps forward, revealing Prince Andrew unmasked through the eyes of Charlotte Briggs, who once believed serving the royals would be an honor-shaping character and kindness, but found instead that at 21 she walked into a reality nothing like the polished dream she imagined and entered a job no staff member wanted. Inside a palace where appearances gleamed but the behavior hidden behind the doors was entirely different, and where Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, was far from the charming public figure the world admired. Behind Buckingham Palace's towering gates and spotless corridors, he was known by those nearest to him as rude, explosive, and shockingly entitled. And Charlotte, who entered his sphere hoping to serve with pride, was immediately confronted by a man whose temper could turn the smallest oversight into a full-scale storm. And years later, when she finally spoke out, her words carried none of the politeness expected of someone trying to stay diplomatic, as her interview came out sharp, blunt, and fueled by experiences she could no longer suppress, saying she didn't care what Andrew thought and calling him horrible, nasty, a man who made her cry more times than she could even remember. And as her testimony spread, the world finally saw the Duke as staff had always known him, not the smiling royal waving from balconies, but an impossible-to-please master who treated people around him like stage props. And her earliest memories showed Andrew as someone who believed the world existed solely to serve him, issuing commands for tasks he could easily do himself, as though lifting a finger would insult his rank, with one of his biggest obsessions being curtains, not their color or fabric, but the tiny, nearly invisible gap Charlotte once left between them, which was enough to unleash one of his infamous outbursts as he stormed out of his office, marched down the hallway, and screamed at her with language far beneath any royal dignity. While his voice echoed through the halls, staff froze. Charlotte cried, and everyone was reminded that in Andrew's world even perfection wasn't safe. But stranger than his anger were his demands, odd rituals bordering on childish enforced with military precision, including his notorious collection of stuffed animals, 72 teddy bears, a hippo, and a black panther, that had to be arranged with exact accuracy according to laminated instruction sheets laid out like battlefield diagrams, as Charlotte even received full training on how to handle the soft toys as though preparing for palace duty rather than arranging plush animals, while his bedroom required pillows scented to the millimeter, pajamas aligned perfectly, bears displayed during the day, removed at night, and restored at sunrise, leaving staff whispering about what kind of grown man needed such rituals just to function. But for Charlotte it wasn't whimsical at all, it was exhausting. Walking on glass every day, knowing one wrong move would trigger another explosion. Another. Servants confirmed the same pattern of Andrew barking orders to assert dominance, expecting worship without offering basic courtesy, belittling staff simply to remind them of their place. And unlike his siblings, Andrew carried no heavy royal burden. He wasn't in line for the throne nor weighed down by responsibilities, yet behaved like a king ruling over frightened subjects, making Charlotte's story less about tantrums or stuffed animals and more about a man who enjoyed breaking people down and creating a work environment so suffocating that even a palace felt like a trap. And this wasn't even the true beginning, because there was something about Andrew that even Charlotte recognized as we look into the making of a prince and his childhood of cruelty, where from the moment he could walk, palace insiders whispered that something about young Andrew felt different, not mischievous or curious but unusually unkind. As while Charles buried himself in books and pushed through challenges with grit, Andrew moved through the palace like someone convinced the world already belonged to him, with staff noticing how he snapped for attention, treated every room like a stage, and every person as someone he could command, tease, or crush depending on his mood. And even as a toddler he seemed drawn to cruelty the way other children are drawn to toys, strutting before the Queen's guards, pulling faces and mocking their stoic posture, until when they didn't react he became enraged, pushing harder to force a response just so he could feel victorious, the first sign of a pattern that followed him for years, where if he couldn't earn admiration he settled for domination. And animals too suffered under his temper, as he kicked family dogs when they didn't move fast enough, laughed when they yelped, and hit horses with sticks just to watch them flinch, until grooms, usually patient and quiet, reached a breaking point, and after he struck a horse one time too many they dragged him to a manure pile and buried him in it headfirst, harsh, shocking, unforgettable. Yet to them the only language he understood. But even that wasn't the worst, as his bullying extended everywhere, with his younger brother Edward becoming a frequent target, enduring pushes, slaps, stolen desserts, and bruises no one dared question. Not playful sibling roughhousing but dominance tests Andrew insisted on winning, and palace staff bore daily torment, with one footman suffering so much taunting he eventually snapped and hit the prince, leaving him with a black eye. And when he tried to resign to the Queen she refused, seemingly recognizing Andrew had crossed too far into something beyond childish mischief. And school failed to reform him, as classmates at prep school and Gordonstown gave him cruel nicknames out of fear and irritation, describing tantrums, sneers, and laughter aimed at others' discomfort, while teachers called him smug, entitled, and nearly impossible to discipline. And as he grew his behavior sharpened with stories of him tugging at female staff members' clothes during palace events, smearing food on their faces, and barking crude orders at servants as if they existed solely for his entertainment, even during camping trips, tearing down classmate shelters, tossing their belongings in rivers, and watching their misery like a performance, with those closest to him summarizing it in one painful line that he didn't behave like a prince but like a tiny tyrant throwing items to the floor, cursing at staff, and issuing commands like edicts while living as though everyone else existed to serve him. And yet, as troubling as these stories appear, they raise a larger question, because when comparing Andrew's behavior with that of other working royals, everything becomes clearer, leading us into a royal contrast of Andrew versus his siblings, where in the complex world of the British royal household, not all royals are equal in the eyes of staff, as former employees consistently highlight dramatic differences between Andrew and his relatives, describing a level of entitlement and immaturity that made him uniquely difficult to work for, while others earned genuine respect through fairness and decency, with Prince Charles remembered as consistently courteous, patient, and respectful towards staff, taking time to acknowledge their work, chatting briefly in hallways or on the lawns, and offering small words of appreciation. And though he demanded long hours and high standards, his tone remained professional rather than demeaning, leaving staff feeling respected rather than belittled, gestures that might seem small but in a rigid environment meant everything. In a hierarchical environment like the palace, these gestures mattered enormously because they created a sense of dignity and mutual respect that flowed from the top down. And likewise, Prince Edward built a reputation for being approachable and considerate with staff, recalling that they felt at ease around him since he rarely demanded unnecessary tasks or behaved unpredictably, as he maintained expectations appropriate to his position while avoiding the late-night whims that reportedly defined Andrew's routine, where Andrew's valet might be awakened in the middle of the night to walk a dog or fulfill other odd requests, while those serving Edward generally enjoyed a predictable and reasonable workload. And although these differences seemed small, they revealed key contrasts in leadership style and character within the royal family, with Princess Anne, known for her relentless work ethic, earning admiration as her household functioned with precision, yet she treated employees as partners in service rather than objects for amusement, as former staff often described her as professional but personable, inspiring loyalty through competence rather than fear. And even in her demanding routines, her fairness allowed workers to feel pride rather than anxiety, while Andrew, by comparison, reportedly left staff drained, frustrated, and sometimes humiliated, as former maids and valets recalled childish or erratic demands such as the infamous teddy bear arrangements or being summoned at 2 in the morning for trivial tasks, which created constant stress, with one maid describing her time with Andrew as the only negative experience of her royal career because he consistently ruined the atmosphere. And unlike his siblings, whose behavior was shaped by responsibility and humility, Andrew's conduct seemed fueled by entitlement reinforced by lifelong privilege, a belief that he was the favored child, and a lack of boundaries during his upbringing, which showed that the palace system wasn't inherently oppressive, since many royals treated staff respectfully even within strict hierarchy. But Andrew's attitude turned his household uniquely toxic, as palace life required obedience and confidentiality yet still allowed space for fair treatment as seen in service to other royals. And ultimately, these contrasts reveal not only Andrew's character but also broader royal dynamics, where privilege can coexist with responsibility, entitlement can be checked by respect, and leadership is defined as much by personal conduct as by title, meaning Andrew's behavior, when compared to the more considerate approaches of his relatives, makes clear that the issue was never palace life but the prince himself. And beyond domestic service, further allegations emerged as his troubling behavior extended far past palace walls, where early tales focused on staff enduring tantrums, relentless demands, and cruel whims, but a darker narrative grew involving claims of sexual misconduct and abuse that drew global attention, revealing a recurring pattern of a man wrapped in privilege, unchecked authority, and silent compliance from those around him, with Virginia Giuffre at the center, accusing Andrew of abusing her while she was underage and describing being coerced into encounters with him in properties linked to notorious associates, accusations that led to civil lawsuits and global scrutiny despite Andrew's denials, as the persistence of these claims emphasized how wealth, influence, and connections created opportunities for wrongdoing while minimizing accountability. And these serious allegations tie closely to everyday staff experiences through one recurring theme: that power combined with protection breeds impunity, because staff were expected to quietly endure his childish or cruel behavior, knowing that questioning a senior royal could jeopardize their positions, as valets, maids, and protection officers were trained to obey rather than challenge, and loyalty was mandatory, while fear of backlash kept many silent, allowing inappropriate behavior to go unchecked, as the same protective system shielding him inside the palace mirrored the structures outside, with seemingly trivial grievances like stuffed animal arrangements, late-night summons, or mocking anyone who displeased him, appearing harmless until viewed alongside the severe allegations, and exposing a disturbing continuity where a personality accustomed to consequences never applied behaved as though whims and desires outweighed the comfort, safety, or rights of anyone in his orbit, and the palace's gilded walls concealed not only privilege but a system enabling misconduct to persist behind closed doors, while staff testimonies and public accusations together portrayed a man insulated by hierarchy whose actions repeatedly exploited the space between power and accountability, as domestic stories that were not criminals still displayed early signs of entitlement, overshadowing empathy and status, overshadowing morality. And once these patterns expanded into elite social circles, the stakes intensified with silence, protection, and influence hiding harm from view, revealing through the link between domestic grievances and wider misconduct claims a clear picture that Andrew's behavior was neither isolated nor misunderstood but nurtured within a culture of unquestioned loyalty, fear, and institutional shielding where every demand, prank, and act of cruelty reflected the same dynamic, enabling far greater misdeeds, leading to the question of how loyalty, fear, and layers of protection transformed Andrew from a spoiled royal into someone emboldened by impunity, which becomes clear in how the palace cultivated his entitlement, as loyalty inside the royal household functioned as an unspoken law weaving through every interaction, with many staff joining as teens and dedicating decades so their livelihoods, identities, and stability were tied completely to royal service, making leaving, questioning, or even hinting at discomfort feel nearly impossible, since the palace was not just a workplace but their entire world where loyalty was the currency, and insiders described this world as ruled by loyalty and fear, where staff were taught not only to serve but to know their place, constantly reminded implicitly or explicitly that they existed to uphold royal authority, not challenge it, and that confronting misconduct or expressing frustration felt unimaginable due to an unspoken rule to obey, endure, and protect the household's image at any cost, while disobedience could bring embarrassment, dismissal, or worse, and financial dependence strengthened this control as many staff had climbed from junior positions to trusted roles, making departure a catastrophic loss of income, housing, pensions, and community. While even minor errors drew sharp reprimands, reinforcing that silence was often the safest survival strategy, as the stability and benefits of royal work acted like invisible chains keeping employees compliant, and institutional protection added yet another barrier with strict hierarchy.